Alright, well. So, this one is NEW by Special Measures, third track off of their EP. Third track I recorded, not necessarily third in the lineup on the EP. So, we'll start with the instruments again. I've done the noise gate thing again. That seemed to work quite well. Just gave me some separation. Not that the problems were actually that great with any of the kick drum stuff in terms of noise. Little mid cut and high pass, compressor, and adding some snap. That's absolutely standard for kick in, kick out, ducking lots of mid, ducking top end, less of a high pass, so more bass ends kept in, and a sub kick effect. So again, standard. Snare, I have the top in. I'm using it. I think the separation was slightly better on this day, as I got this mixed in quite a lot higher than the triggered snare. This is fairly self-explanatory, just a high pass and some compression, and then the standard Pultec trick with some top end boost as well at 8 kHz. Get the snare rattle sound out of that side as well. Snare bottom, no processing on at all. It's just in there a little bit. Well, not a little bit, quite a lot actually. Must have quite liked the sound of it. And finally, snare trigger, same kind of thing. So you got your compressor, and before that you've got some quite harsh EQ shaping, but that's basically the same as what the Pultec does with that little boost there, with a mid cut and then a top end cut. So I must have been looking for more snap when I put this in. Okay, then rack tom and floor tom. This time these are not panned as hard, but the floor tom has quite a lot of patterns on them. So I went through this with Grant and tried to make the floor tom a fair bit less bass end heavy, actually less resonant, because otherwise it just creates a long note. So some kind of thwacky compression with the DBX 160. DBX 160 is great because the whole VCA thing, it's got quite a fast release, really. So that works quite well to actually give things punch, I'd argue. Then a little bit of boosting everywhere. And then finally, I used Transient Master, which isn't really a particularly, I suppose it's not particularly respected plugin in terms of its effect, but it seemed to work. It seemed to do the job at dampening down the toms, which probably should have been made less resonant in the room at the time. So that's that. Rack tom is the same thing, and I've cut these out because I wasn't being lazy and gating them. So overheads. These are okay. They're hard left and right, the overheads this time. I changed it up. I think this was probably to do with the guitars, because the guitars weren't as wide. I didn't do anything extra to the guitars here. I didn't add any parts in. That meant that the overheads could be wider, and then the toms could be brought in a little bit as well. So the overheads taken off the Fairchild emulation here. That's just a little high pass again. I feel quite strongly about cleaning up the low end. It's an important part of the mix for me. I'd like to have clean mixes. So the Puigchild 670 is off. LA2A supercharger, which I hadn't used on overheads before, but that crushes them slightly. So you've got fair bit of saturation, bright character, so bright tone, and a little bit of compression as well. And then finally being sidechained to the kick and gain for automation. Okay, so the room. This is similar to how it's been on past tracks. So cut top end out and bottom end out, and then I've got supercharger that's doing more of that and more distortion as well, and a fair amount of compression too. So that's cool. And then I've got that sidechain to the kick as well. The bass, I've split it up into clean as well again, which is the same style of clean as we had on Woe, so that seemed to work quite well for me. Filled up the verses quite nicely, and then the lows are the same, and the highs, I believe, are the same as well. Yes, they are. So the same chain, distortion into amp, into compressor, into EQ, and the EQ's dealing with some notching out some things that have been exacerbated by the distortion. Okay, guitars. So a lot of compressors up there. Basically, these are just the two that Ryan recorded on the day. I made him double track, as with everything, pretty much. Okay, so just notching out some frequencies, tiny bit of shaping, although not much really. King's microphone. This is an interesting plugin. It's basically like having a mic emulation after the guitars. I must have felt like they didn't fit, needed some colour, and I was just scrolling through and found this, and it seemed to provide me with the effect I wanted. And finally a supercharger with right character. So that's exactly what I wanted. For some reason, I have no clue why the King's microphone worked, but it did. And then sidechaining to the kick, sidechaining to the snare, snare bottom, okay, and sidechaining to the vocals in the verse. So that's what I've been doing there. Then the guitar solo had its own reverb, very long reverb, 2.5 seconds, and it also had me brightening it up a little bit, and that's it. Joe's distorted parts, so just cutting top end and bottom off. It's really simple. Probably some of the guitars that can occasionally get quite buzzy, and just a high cut at 12 kind of restricts the space they inhabit. They don't get into the overheads too much or anything, into the space of the overheads, that is. And again, sidechain to the kick and sidechain to the snare. I overdubbed Joe's guitar part just here. Just gave myself an amp sim, standard, tried to match it to what Joe was playing. But he had some odd notes ringing out in his guitar part, so I just made sure I did something simple that went over the top of what he did. Well, instead actually, but it kind of it didn't do more than he did, it did less. And then some shaping to go with that. So quite heavy shaping actually, just to make sure that it was subtle and didn't stick out too much in the mix. Then Joe's arpeggio, that's simple. Give it some little pling so you can hear the top end and the pick attack on the strings, and some compression for a clean part. That's nice, just to make sure it's nice and even and stuff. And then a bit of chorus, that kind of helped sit it back as well. Okay, so finally, vocals. So this processing I did differently in the verse to the chorus because I wanted the verse to be considerably louder and closer, if that makes sense, closer to the microphone. So simple setup here really, de-esser into the compressor, into a vocal rider, into another compressor. In hindsight, probably should have put the vocal rider first. Then boosting top end all over the place, making it nice and bright, and more presence over here. And then gain for automation, yes. So that's that basically, and that's the same setup here exactly. The only real difference is the volume. I was going for a kind of Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit kind of vibe, where it's quite up front and close in the verses, and then it really goes for it in the choruses. That's how I wanted it to sound. Also, Song 2 by Blur, another example of that technique. Okay, so then, bus effects. It had vocal verb, standard, RC48, 1.5 second, 1 second, there we go. J37 on exactly how you'd expect, just giving some nice saturated delays. Snare verb, this is pretty much the same setup apart from the gate. And then the instrument verb is similar to the snare verb, but made a lot shorter for our in sound. Then the parallel compression with drums. This time I went the other way with the EQ of the drums, just experimenting with that really, whether to be putting the EQ into the compression or the compression into the EQ. And then the EQ is doing, well, what you'd expect with parallel compression, most of the top end afterwards, and I'm mixing it in there. So, and then finally the sub is doing the same things as before, just reintroducing bass end and compressing it to get it to sit well. Everything's being sent into the side chain against the vocals, music bus, and then finally looking at the same mastering chain as beforehand because it has worked well consistently. And then the gain setting is now plus 11.4 dB, just because each time I mix, I'm obviously mixing slightly differently in terms of the overall volume. I have to even that out here. Okay, that's it for NEW.